So let me cut straight to it. China just pulled off one of the most audacious moves in the global tech war. And honestly, it's something Washington should have seen coming but somehow didn't prepare for. Just days after Xi Jinping sat down with Donald Trump in South Korea, ostensibly to ease tensions, Beijing turned around and dropped a bombshell. All state-funded data centers in China are now banned from using or purchasing foreign AI chips. That's right. No more NVIDIA, no more AMD, no more Intel. Gone. Overnight. I used to be on the inside at a major media house, watching how inconvenient truths got buried under corporate priorities. I left that world behind. Now I work for you, and I'm here to tell you what the establishment won't. If this kind of independent coverage matters to you, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and if you really want to support what we're building here, consider becoming a sponsor. It means more than you know, and it keeps this operation running without compromises. Now, back to China's move. This isn't just a policy tweak. This is China severing one of its last remaining dependencies on American semiconductors for its AI sector, and what it signals is even bigger. Beijing is now confident, publicly, strategically confident, that its domestic chip industry can stand on its own 2 feet. Here's the kicker. When you talk about reducing reliance on an adversary, and that's Washington's terminology, by the way, it cuts both ways. China just proved it can flip a switch and stop buying US chips, because those imports no longer align with its national security framework. Meanwhile, when we talk about America's dependence on China's rare earth processing dominance, the solution isn't so simple. It's going to take years, maybe a full decade, for Washington to address that vulnerability, but China, they did it with the stroke of a pen. So let's break down what exactly this ban entails. All new state-funded data centers, projects that are less than 30% complete, must now use Chinese processors exclusively. We're talking chips from Huawei, Alibaba, and other domestic players. Data centers that are already fully built and operational, the ones currently running on US chips, they're going to face audits and gradual phase-outs. It's not immediate for everything, but the direction is crystal clear. And this isn't happening in isolation. This is part of a much longer-term plan to build domestic AI hardware, to secure chip manufacturing at home, and to reduce US leverage in the global tech sector. Now, this ban doesn't just hit NVIDIA and AMD's revenue, though it absolutely does. What it really does is redirect billions of dollars toward Huawei, toward Alibaba, toward China's domestic tech ecosystem. Jensen Huang, NVIDIA's CEO, even admitted it himself. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, "We went from 95% market share in China to 0. I can't imagine any policymaker thinking that's a good idea, but that's exactly what happened. And here's the thing, in all of NVIDIA's forecasts now, they're assuming 0 revenue from China. If anything changes, Huang says, it'll be a bonus. But he also acknowledges that China is the second largest computer market in the world, and he thinks it's a mistake for the United States not to participate. I mean, he's not wrong from a business perspective, but from a geopolitical perspective, that ship has sailed. So why is China making this move right now? Well, China's leadership is moving from dependence to insulation. They're building a self-sustaining AI ecosystem that is free from American influence. And of course, the United States is doing the exact same thing. If Beijing is a threat to the United States, as Washington loves to claim, then it's only natural that China views dependence on Washington as simply undesirable. It really does go both ways. With this ban, Beijing is essentially declaring that mission within reach. The new regulation targets data centers funded by the state that are still under construction, 30% or less complete, prohibiting them from buying or installing foreign chips. Facilities already in operation may be granted exemptions at this time, but the message is crystal clear. China's future AI infrastructure must be built on Chinese technology. NVIDIA once powered China's technology sector. Not anymore. A lot has changed over a very short period of time. Now, if you've been following the US-China trade negotiations, the economic tensions, the full-blown trade war, you'll notice that China's push to reduce reliance on American chips is part of a much broader strategy. In Beijing, they call it algorithmic sovereignty. And the vision here is total control over the nation's computing infrastructure by 2027. Let me give you the timeline. Last September, the Cyberspace Administration of China ordered major tech companies to stop purchasing NVIDIA processors, citing security concerns. Around the same time, Chinese Premier Li Qiang publicly praised the performance of domestic chips on state television, clearly trying to underscore the government's confidence that homegrown alternatives are ready to compete. But here's the thing: China's ambitions didn't start with US export controls, they go back over a decade. Since 2014, Beijing has poured tens of billions of dollars into building a domestic semiconductor industry that covers both legacy chips for consumer electronics and advanced logic chips for AI and military use. This long-term investment forms a critical part of China's dual goals: transforming its economy into a high-tech manufacturing powerhouse and being in a position to compete from a national security perspective. And it's working. A recent report from the US National Institute of Standards and Technology found that Chinese AI models have improved dramatically in the past year alone. That suggests that even without American hardware, China's software and training techniques are improving very, very quickly. If you're finding this breakdown valuable, leave a comment below. Tell me what you think. Are we watching the beginning of a complete tech decoupling? And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. This is the kind of analysis you won't get anywhere else. Beijing's latest policy reflects an increased level of confidence. It effectively demonstrates that, from the point of view of the Chinese government, relying on US technology could expose critical sectors to future disruptions. China's leaders no longer want to be held hostage, effectively, to Washington's export bans, to the flip-flopping, even if that means temporary setbacks or inefficiencies in the short term. The decision also fits a broader political narrative here, projecting technological self-reliance at home, while signaling to the world that China is ready to define its own digital future. Let's talk about Huawei for a second. Huawei first revealed its intentions to venture into chip production back in 2018, but the company went silent on these plans after being blacklisted by the US in 2019, which cited national security concerns, claims Huawei denies. Since then, analysts say Huawei has emerged as a front-runner in China's efforts to establish a domestic semiconductor manufacturing sector. In September 2025, Huawei unveiled its long-term semiconductor strategy for the first time, announcing plans to introduce the most powerful computing clusters globally. They're committing to a one-year release schedule, aiming to double their computing power with each launch. That's an aggressive roadmap. Huawei also intends to introduce new supernodes that enhance chip interconnectivity at high speeds. These nodes are rack systems housing multiple chips organized into clusters. The Atlas 950, slated for launch in Q4 2026, will support 8,192 Ascend chips. Huawei is confident it will significantly outperform its competitors across all key metrics, and production is ramping up fast. Huawei plans to make about 600,000 of its flagship 910C Ascend chips next year, roughly double this year's level. They struggled to get those products out the door for much of 2025 because of US sanctions, but they're overcoming those hurdles. Meanwhile, SMIC, China's leading chip foundry, plans to double its 7-nanometer production capacity next year. That's the most advanced process currently in mass production in China. While Huawei is presently SMIC's largest customer for these processor lines, this move will also allow smaller Chinese chipmakers like Cambricon, Metax, and Byron to secure larger shares of SMIC's capacity, intensifying competition in China's rapidly expanding market. China is also aiming to triple its overall AI processor output next year. One fab dedicated to manufacturing Huawei's AI chips is slated to begin production by the end of this year, with 2 additional plants expected to come online in 2026. So yeah, China is absolutely serious about this. Now, for Washington, the message should be equally clear. The United States can no longer assume that it will remain the leader in the semiconductor industry and that China's chip sector will lag. Beijing's recent moves underscore how central technological sovereignty has become to its national strategy. In response, the United States might be compelled to increase export controls even further to gain some type of control, which likely means more trade tensions in the short term. But here's where it gets really interesting. China has leverage that the US doesn't. China controls the processing of almost all the world's rare earths, critical minerals used in everything from semiconductors to defense systems. In October 2025, China announced new rare earth export restrictions, applying for the first time the Foreign Direct Product Rule, a mechanism long used by Washington to restrict semiconductor exports to China. This means China can now regulate the sale of rare earth materials, even if they're processed or used by non-Chinese companies abroad. And here's the brutal math. Building a mine-to-magnet supply chain for rare earths takes 10 to 15 years. Semiconductor technologies, the US's own choke point, become obsolete in 5. Time favors Beijing. Even if Western projects break ground today, they will not dent China's dominance this decade. At the Busan summit in late October, President Trump agreed to scale back tariffs and suspend plans for new technology export controls. In return, Xi pledged to pause rare earth export restrictions for 1 year and resume shipments to U.S. companies. But China secured flexibility. Earlier curbs on some minerals remained, and Beijing retained the ability to reimpose controls after the truce expires. So while the U.S. can ban chip exports to China relatively quickly, China's control over rare earths gives it long-term strategic leverage that Washington simply can't counter overnight. So where does all this leave us? Beijing no longer sees dependency on Washington as acceptable, and its domestic industry will now form the foundation of its digital power. It remains to be seen how this competition progresses, but it's definitely clear that the global AI race has entered a new, more defined phase, one where self-reliance, not interdependence, is the measure of power. China is building an entirely self-sufficient AI ecosystem, from chips to data centers to software. The US is doing the same, trying to secure its own supply chains and reduce reliance on China. But the asymmetry is striking. China can cut off US chips overnight, while the US is looking at a decade-long process to reduce dependence on Chinese rare earths. This is the new reality. The era of globalized interdependent tech supply chains is over. We're now in an era of technological sovereignty, where nations are racing to control their own digital destinies, and frankly, China just made a very bold statement about where it stands in that race. So let me recap what we've covered today. China banned all foreign AI chips from state-funded data centers, cutting off NVIDIA, AMD, and Intel overnight. This signals Beijing's confidence in its domestic chip industry, particularly Huawei's rapid advancement. Meanwhile, China controls rare earth processing, giving it long-term leverage that the US can't match quickly. We're witnessing the end of interdependent tech supply chains and the beginning of a race for complete technological sovereignty. China just showed its hand, and it's stronger than Washington anticipated. If this kind of reporting matters to you, if you want to keep getting the real story without the corporate filter, hit that like button right now, subscribe to the channel, and seriously consider becoming a sponsor. This work doesn't happen without your support, and every bit helps keep us independent and honest. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. I read every single one, and I want to know where you think this is all heading. Stay sharp out there.